Good.
Oh, we are live. I'm so excited.
Hey, so am I. So am I. Thank you for having me, Raabia. This is great.
Totally. Thank you so much for being here, Gigi. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from around the world. I am Raabia Shafi, and I am so excited to have you here. Join us for Legit Leadership Live. It is a series that I started a couple of months ago, actually, toward the end of 2020, to really have a place for real talk for amazing leaders across all industries. So we are in episode 4 today, and I am here and I am so delighted and so honored to be joined by my lovely friend and dear guest and amazing expert, writer, thought leader, consultant, facilitator, the list goes on. And we'll get into her intro in a little bit detail in a moment. Gigi Gilliard, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, let me tell you, the pleasure is completely all mine, Raabia. Literally, I wrote on my LinkedIn yesterday that this is what we think about when we grow up, right? When we grow up, we want to be with Raabia, talking about all things. So I feel like a big grown-up lady. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness, I'm so delighted. And I also want to give a shout out to a mutual friend of ours who helped our paths to cross when the stars aligned here, Carrie Skoronsky. So she's a beautiful partner in the leadership world, and I'm such a fan, and I know Gigi is too. So thank you for introducing us, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie. Shout out to Carrie. Carrie has like the best network, right? She's like the greatest sister. She shares all her gifts. And Raabia, you've been a gift. So good stuff.
Thank you, Gigi. Thank you so much. So I would love to get started and share a little bit of an overview of who you are and what you're about, and then we can get into some questions. And I have some chats we have some comments coming in, which is so exciting in our live chat. And I'm going to just make sure that we can see your comments. Feel free to throw in any questions that you might have, or chats, or and we'll see if we can get to those questions along the way. So thank you again. And so Gigi, I am going to let's see. I'm going to start off by sharing that you are a speaker, you are a leadership coach, you're an organizational development consultant with Gigi Gilliard Development. And I'm going to get into your bio in a moment, but can you share with us a little bit of what do you do and what is your firm all about? And then we can take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I tell the folks on my team that we do all the things, right? We do all the things. But you started to sort of set us up there. We are a Gigi Gilliard Development. If I start from there, we are a boutique consultancy that focuses on the organizational development space. And we focus on interventions and solutions that help organizations thrive better and grow and do the things that they want to do to be the best organizations they can be. So I do that in a couple of ways. One is around leadership development, where I do leadership development training, executive coaching, and actually a lot of traditional facilitating, where I facilitate training sessions. But in the last, I want to say 10, 11, 12 years, my specific niche focus has been diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. It used to be a time when it was just me. It was just Gigi Gilliard. I was a sole proprietor all on my own. I now have a team of 6 other people. So there are 7 of us all together at Gigi Gilliard Development. I couldn't be more thrilled. It is a riot. It is a riot. But I really believe that we are doing the work that we were sent here to do. I'm going to talk a little bit later about purpose. And that purpose is consulting with organizations, depending on how they need us to consult. Like I said, some organizations need me to come in and act as a traditional trainer and do facilitation. Some organizations need me to consult, to actually just sort of help and guide. I do a lot of steering committees. And there are just many organizations that need me to help come and create strategy around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So those are all the things. And also we wrote a book also.
That too. Yeah. I mean, that's it, Gigi. That's all you do? Oh, gosh.
That's it.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And also, so I'll just pick up kind of where you left off there. Gigi, as the author of The Loud Brown Round Girl and also The Inclusion Code, both published in 2020. So congrats to you. Very exciting. Yes. And also, here is something that I want to just kind of re-emphasize, and then we'll dive into it. So we have, in this age of increased discord and division, Gigi is laser focused on unifying humans in the workplace and in the world by elevating the inclusion and belonging conversation. So with that, Gigi, maybe we can dive in. What do diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging mean to you?
Yeah. I love that we're starting with that question. I feel like that gets right to the heart of it, right? So there used to be a time in this space as a trainer where I would answer that question by saying, well, what it means to me is that organizations need to believe in the business case around diversity. Organizations and leaders need to know what the business case is and give into that knowledge by putting together unconscious bias training. Right now, there's problems with that. And when I say the business case, I know that I don't need to say this for most of our listeners, but what I'm talking about is the idea that studies and research has proven over the years that organizations that focus on diversity and inclusion, or inclusion and diversity, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, organizations who focus on diversity in that way outperform organizations who don't. As a matter of fact, McKinsey, right, some of the, the biggest, data, sort of data miners in the world, McKinsey has run what I like to call a trifecta study. So they did a study in 2015, they did another study in 2018, and then they did another study in May of 2020 about diversity and about how, again, organizations who focus on diversity outperform by as much as 36% versus organizations who don't, right? The problem with that is that, for me, that's not enough, right? And there really is sort of a problem with just focusing on the business case. So to answer your question, for me, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is really about being healthy. It's about the health of an organization. And when I say that, and Raabia, I know that you subscribe to this thought too. It's important for our organizations to thrive, to not just survive, to not just do well, right? To not just skate by. We want to thrive. Well, if you want to thrive as an org, it means that your people have to thrive. And we're living in a world where it is almost impossible to help people thrive unless they feel like they're included, right? And I mean all peoples, right? People of color, non-people of color, white people, black people, right? Brown people. We've got to think about how diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is a part of the formula that helps an organization to survive. And just with that, the last thing I'll say is that's one of the reasons why at GGD, that's what we affectionately call Gigi Gilliard Development, GGD. One of the things that we talk about is actually that formula, right? So in my answer, I talked about diversity and inclusion and diversity, equity, inclusion. And while the little letters in an acronym shouldn't matter, they actually do when we think about the right formula. We believe that the right formula for any organization, if you're going to talk about this work, is that we need diversity plus equity plus inclusion in order to create this feeling and this atmosphere of belonging. Belonging has been, I believe, the big missing piece of that formula. When we have belonging, which is a sentiment, which is a feeling, right, then we can talk about some of the other nasty things that go along with diversity and equity and inclusion. And we can talk about it in a way that is healthy. So that's what it means to me. This is why I've given my life to this work. And that's why you'll always hear me and my colleagues at GGD refer to this work as DEI&B.
And B. Yeah.
And B. Yes.
Totally. And so when it comes to belonging and also the DEI piece of that and really cultivating that sentiment, in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, the George Floyd protests, like this year, over the past year, I would say we've seen, of course, a surge in interest in a more kind of curiosity around not just what's going on, but how can we bridge the gap here that we're experiencing. And I know that's meant a lot for your business as well. Like you've been busy, and it's kind of like, hey, welcome to the party. We've been working on this for a while. Yeah.
Right.
Right. So tell me, Gigi, with all of this, what are some of the biggest challenges that you think leaders might face these days in really cultivating a true sense of that belonging and embracing DEI, not just because it's in vogue now, but really because it is, in fact, the right thing to do?
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, in your question, there lies the answer. I think the one challenge that is particularly difficult for us, and one of the things that we're always talking to leaders about, is about not doing this work in a performative way, right? If there's one thing that I find over and over and over again with our clients is that, and I think that to some extent leaders,
I think you just froze, but you were, sorry about that interruption, everyone, but you were just talking about the performative piece, and then we lost you. So
yes.
We're back in action.
So let me pick up right there. So I think that leaders, giving them the benefit of the doubt, I think leaders want to do the right thing. They see what's going on in the news, what's going on in the world. Leaders want to rise and meet the moment. But I think the challenge in meeting the moment right now is when we want to meet the moment for the sake of just doing that, for the sake of saying, it seems to be what we should be doing to talk about diversity right now, as opposed to really sort of, again, going back to my first response, thinking about the health of the organization and thinking about how diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, particularly that inclusion and belonging piece, help to thrive, helping people to feel safe, helping people to feel respected and seen, and how all of those things ultimately lead to and more productivity, but that it isn't just about the moment, right? It isn't just about performing. It is about saying, well, we hired Gigi for the sake of hiring Gigi. So what, right? I'm going to show up with my great slides and my great team, and I'm going to do the work, but that's not enough. And I don't mean just me. I mean, other practitioners like me, but that's not enough. It isn't enough to just, well, this is what it seems like we ought to do. There really is, to some extent, a deeper imperative underneath it. And when leaders understand that deeper imperative, whether it is a moral imperative or whether it is because they are really concerned about the health and the thrive of their organization, they'll do a deeper dive into the work. It won't be just surface. I find that when we just sort of say that we're doing diversity, then the work is very surface, and it's not as it is not as in-depth.
Yeah. And I think you're really kind of highlighting on that point where what about those organizations that are, just quoting a black square on their social media, or just doing, kind of talking about it, but not really walking the walk. And it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, like it sounds like these are the types of conversations that you might have with prospective leaders who come to you, or prospective clients who come to you and are like, hey, we kind of need to fix this, or we need to work on it. Is that kind of fair? Do you go down that route to help them see the performative versus like the real way of doing this?
Yeah, 100%. We go down that road, and I'm going to tell you exactly where we see it, right, and where this comes up. It really is about the investment, right? And I don't mean just the money, because I take issue and sort of umbrage with the diversity sort of as a commercial thing to do. So it's not just about the numbers and the money. But when I talk about the investment of time, when leaders are like, okay, we get it. This is not going to be a quick fix. This is going to be, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. We really, really need to do the things. Number one. Number two, another way I see this is when leaders just say, well, just come on in and, can you run us through a couple of sessions and teach us about unconscious bias, and then we'll be better? Yeah. Like, no, sir, ma'am. Right? It really is a lot more than that. And, and naturally, we customize our work, and we go in and we do intense diagnostics. We do intense diagnostics around what an organization needs, what are the needs of, the stakeholders? What are the needs of the employees? Mm-hmm. What are the things that they know about? What are the things that they're feeling? Do they feel included? Do they not feel included? What does that look like? But when we start to have those questions, we can tell, right, whether an organization is really committed, because that's the word, whether or not they're really committed to doing the deep work, because it is deep work. It's not easy.
It's not. Yeah.
For sure.
And when you say deep work, what,
Yeah.
and that might be obvious to us, it might be kind of not so obvious to others. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. And thank you for asking that, 'cause that's a great way to expound. One of the things that I call myself, I have a lot of different names, right? But I call myself a conversation architect, and here's why. What you asked me earlier about the inclusion code. So the inclusion code, it is a book, but it is a business conversation model that I wrote a couple of years ago around not just what should be in the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, but more how we have the conversation, right? So the inclusion code is both the what are the things that we should be talking about, what are the things that we're addressing, but it also addresses how we should have the conversation. And one of those hows, one of the responses or the answers to those hows is what we like to call the extended conversation, right? To be a trainer, corporate trainer by trade, I actually hate the word training, because it really is about crafting and architecting conversations that are extended and crafting the space for that. That space might look like focus groups. That space might look like creating ERG groups, creating special diversity and belonging task force, really creating listening posts, and not opportunities for just, although I do believe it's important for employees to be heard, but we've got to create the space for extension. Why? Because if we look at it, it's really our relationship difference. It's our relationship with difference. How do I look? What is, how is difference embraced in my work culture? Are we embracing at how different we are, right, in our workplace? Well, there are people who want to embrace difference, right? All for it. I want to be an ally. I'm an ally. Let's talk. There are other people who might want to do it but don't know the words. They don't have language, so it's time, and we need the space, and we also need the intentionality, right? To have these conversations that are extended. So a 90-minute, 2-hour, training session with Gigi, although my slides will be great, we'll have great slides, right? And I will come and be, I promise you, right? But that's not really oftentimes where the deep work is. Oftentimes, and if not all the time, the deep work is out of the training room, right? It's out of the training room. It's talking about real world situations. What is it like in that meeting, right, where you've raised your hand a couple of times, or you have contributed to the conversation 2 times, and for whatever reason you haven't been recognized in the conversation, right? When maybe your counterparts have been recognized, or maybe the males, those who identify as male in the room have been recognized, but you've been passed over. What does that look like? What does that look like on my team when there's someone on my team who may be a person of color, or maybe someone who's differently abled, who's been consistently passed over for a promotion when I know that this person is qualified? What is that? What does that look like? And how do we root through, right, those behaviors and those incidents and those skills? That work, to your point, to your question, that's deep work, and that work often happens outside the training room. And organizations that are committed to doing that and are committed to letting somebody like me and my team come in and explain what that work looks like, how long that work will take, sort of incremental progress we see, and how we've got to really see that as progress. Those organizations who are willing to do the deep work. That's what I mean by that.
That's such helpful context, and something that I know you and I, Gigi, we deal with, where my field of expertise is on leadership, coaching, and also really creating better workplace cultures. Your field of expertise is, of course, in what you're talking about. And I think one of the kind of through lines, I would say, in both of these realms is making sure that people actually want to do the deep work, as opposed to imposing it onto them. And I'm just thinking about nearly every time I'll have a member of the C-suite of an organization I'm supporting, they'll reach out to me and they'll say, hey, there's some high potential folks. I would love for you to do some executive coaching with them. And I always have a check-in with that individual, the potential coachee, and like, hey, what are areas of opportunity? What do you want to work on? What are your strengths, et cetera, before we even decide to move forward. And I would say 99% of the time, what I get is, hey, this conversation is a lot more different than I expected to be. I'm relieved because I thought this was kind of punitive, like I was getting in trouble. And right. And we see that. And I was wondering if or what your perspective might be. The reason I brought up that coaching example is I don't ever, as a rule of thumb, work with someone who doesn't really want to do it and really isn't invested in it, because I'm not in the business of pulling teeth and being kind of the punisher of some bad behavior, because I don't think that coaching works in that way. So I wanted to just see, what is your take on these issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? They are sensitive. They do involve the deep work. What happens in an organization where there's some folks who are really into it, but then others who just don't want to do it? What happens? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so that's so interesting. This comes up a lot, right? And I'm glad you asked this question. So first of all, one of the things that we do a lot, and I mentioned this already, is we do a lot of really in-depth diagnostics before we come into an organization, right? And great surveys and focus groups and one-on-one interviews can give you only but so much qualitative information. We get that information, we get that data, and we craft our solutions around that. But one of the things that we can't avoid is that our organizations are oftentimes, right, there are people in the world, say it, who are just going to be racist. They are. They that's just where they are, and they don't want to change, and that's the end of it. We often find those kinds in our organization, and I liken it to an example I learned some years ago when I was doing some work with another training organization. I find that there are often 4 types of people on a team or in an organization, right? The first kind is your champion. Yes, I want to do diversity. I want to talk about it. I want to change. I want to embrace difference. This is a champion, right?
Right.
Then you've got the follower who's like, who is this lady Gigi with her slides talking about DEI? There's a training. We got to go. We'll go. Fine. We'll go. The followers. Then you have people in an organization who are cynics. They're like, diversity training. Training on unconscious bias. Yeah, okay. So they'll still attend, right? They may do a lot of pushback and sort of in the plenary sessions, but they'll be there. And then there's this 4th person that's typically like a saboteur. Right. Like I said, I learned this a long time ago. I found this in my practical work to be the case. That's no different than those people who want to have this conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Some people, like I mentioned, they embrace it. They embrace difference. There are some people who are just kind of going along to get along. My supervisor, my manager, right, senior leadership wants me to go to this session with this lady, right? There's some people who are going to come cynical, and there's some people who are going to come and they are the saboteurs. The saboteurs I typically find are people who the people who I mentioned who are sort of stuck in their ways and stuck in their thinking, and they're not going to change and they don't want to change.
Right.
Honestly, if I'm honest, when I'm doing work in an organization, I'm not talking to them, right? I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to the cynics, believe it or not, because a cynic can change, right? A cynic can change with really this, going back to this term of deep work, with great conversation, with helping the cynic to reach places in themselves where they can find empathy, really partnering a cynic with someone who's a champion, right? Really igniting something in the cynic and igniting their curiosity. A cynic can change. So I'm talking to the cynics, I'm really talking to the followers, right? Because the followers, sometimes they're kicking and screaming, but they really do want to be there, right? They really do. Maybe they're afraid to ask the questions. Maybe they're afraid to speak up. Maybe the followers don't have the language. Hey, Gigi, I have a Black colleague. I don't know. Do I say Black? Do I say African American? There's a person on my team who's a member of the LGBTQIA community. How do I address them? I have questions. Sometimes the followers are full of curiosity. They just don't know how to ask their questions, right? So I say that to say that those 3 groups, the cynics, the followers, and the champions, that's who I'm talking to. The people that I can't change, we're not going to change them, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to change them. And I'm not going to like knock my head against the wall to do that. But the people who want to change, and let me say this, there are many, many, many people in this world and many, many, many people in the workplace who do
Yeah.
want to change. They just need the direction and they need the guidance and
Yeah.
they need a lexicon sometimes, right? So I'm here for those folks. And if there is someone in that last group who might hear something, have a different experience and think, you know what, I do want to challenge my bias. I do want to challenge my assumptions. I have grown up this way. Maybe there is a different way that I can think. I would love to be able to reach that person. But I'm talking to the people who are ready to change.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're primed and they don't have a total wall up because, it's so interesting, Gigi, some advice that I've gotten from business coaches before. And I work with coaches myself. And I remember I continue to run up against this thing where I'm like, I want so badly for them to embrace a concept. And one of my coaches said, Raabia, you cannot care more than your client about their success. You can't. 100%. And I'm like, but I do, right? That's just, I think it's in our heart. We care so much. And if those folks were not in those classrooms or those workshops that you actually could try to help provide the lexicon and the change, like it wouldn't even be worth our time. Why waste it? You know? So it's I don't know if you've experienced that before, but sometimes it's hard but then it's like putting the ownership back on those individuals. Like it's really up to you because no one can change your mind but yourself about whether or not it's important to invest in this.
Yeah, 100%. And I agree with that. It really isn't. And it is about giving people accountability, right? It is like people have to understand, like if we want an organization that has a great pathos, right? Where like, you know, we emotionally are taking care of each other and we are giving into the sense of belonging and the sense of value, right? It really is going to take each one of us. And that sounds like very like, you know, we are the world, like, you know, ebony and ivory, right? And I don't mean it that way exactly, but it does take all of us to participate. Now, I do believe that I am responsible as the leader, as the practitioner, as the consultant that's been hired to lead the charge, right? To really be the expert, to be the deep expert, to not be afraid, right? And there are many times when I feel like, really with this conversation, like, you know, and I may want to sort of in my flesh, like pull back. But that's when I've got to be like, no, but the B is for belonging, but the B is also for bravery. Right? Somebody's got to be brave. Somebody's got to say, listen, guys, I know right now talking about the way that bias shows up on our team of 6 people is uncomfortable. I know we feel uncomfortable right now. This is terrible. It's terrible. But let's push past this moment. Let's talk about what can we do in our individual interactions on the team and what are some of the suggestions that we can bring to senior management about policy change and blah, 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 blah. And it really is about being on the vanguard, right? And not being afraid to shrink back, right? Even, I've heard this quote before that, you know, I'm afraid, but I'm going to go anyway, right? I believe that that's my responsibility. And I believe that as a leader who is modeling this behavior, I've got to model that behavior for my clients. I'm afraid, but I'm going to go anyway. You, CEO, SVP, EVP, guess what? I know you might be afraid or maybe you're apathetic, I'm not sure, but we need to go anyway.
We need to go
anyway if we are invested truly in this work.
Yeah. And, you know, that's so, and I know we've partnered together with clients before that Gigi is so aligned with the same kind of principle where I'm like, change has to start from the top, right? There's no point in moving forward at the, you know, frontline staff, mid-level management, if it's something so big in terms of these cultural things that need to be addressed. So if we don't have the buy-in from the ultimate decision makers and stakeholders, there's kind of no point. That's at least what I've seen. I don't know if you've experienced that yourself.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. This is something that we say this, all the time in this work. The idea that if I don't have the buy-in and the partnership, buy-in is like one of these buzzwords, right? It's the buy-in, and I'm a thought leader, right? All those buzzwords. But if we don't have the partnership, I'm going to say partnership of the person who has the most power. Yeah. Right. That's usually the CEO and the decision makers leaders, right? The CHRO, the appropriate EVPs and SVPs, if we don't have their partnership, and I mean partnership where I have their ear, where you're going to get a call from Gigi and you will respond to me and you're going to listen, right? And you're going to ask me questions and you're going to, push back and, challenge me, because that's a part of the conversation. But we need that partnership. And what I really need, what is helpful for me, when leaders partner in understanding that there are things that they don't understand. There is an elegance in this work when there is a piece of humility in the comportment of a leader, particularly a leader who is white, who's trying to understand the experiences of people of color in their organization. Right? Just because, you want to do this work and you want to understand doesn't mean that you do. It's actually, if you ask me, one of the great tells of a great ally. Right? A great ally, right? Another word that we've been banding about a lot is to be able to say, I want to understand, Gigi, I do. But real talk, I don't. And honestly, that is okay. And I need that kind of partnership from leaders to say, okay, sir, okay, ma'am, now we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere. Let's talk through what you feel like you don't understand. And sometimes it's a sentiment, going back to that sentiment of belonging. Sometimes they're like, well, I don't understand how this group of people doesn't feel like they're respected. How come this group of people doesn't feel like they belong? How come? And then again, it's up to me and other leaders to bring examples, to expound on what it feels like for an employee, for a stakeholder, to feel bias in the workplace. When I have that kind of partnership from the most senior leaders, I really feel like our programs work, and I feel like we see the most progress.
Yeah. So it sounds like humility, bravery, curiosity, the right intentions. Those are all essential ingredients for, and empathy, of course, like essential for anything to really have that impact that these organizations would theoretically be looking to have.
100%.
Yeah. So Gigi, I do want to shift gears for a moment, to a question about women of color in the workplace, which, as you know, is a very big area of passion of mine, and I know yours too. I want to just dive into something a little bit more about what you said about this notion of bravery and speaking up. And I imagine that when you are doing the diagnostic and the interviews and kind of culling the information, I would love if you can articulate what are some of the fears or kind of themes that you have picked up on, so that you can just name those, because for our audience listening, I think normalizing that tension and helping people realize, hey, if you're feeling it, you're not the only one. I feel like understanding they're not alone can help to spark some sort of action. So would you be open to kind of sharing what are some of those things that people are experiencing that might be causing that frustration in the workplace?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things that come to my mind, but one of the things that comes to my mind right away, and this is not an accusation or an indictment, it's just a truism. This is something that I see, particularly as we talk about the difference of race. This idea of white fragility, right? So loosely defined, white fragility is the feeling of uncomfortability or the sense that a white colleague may, I don't want to overgeneralize, may feel a sense of uncomfortability, may feel put upon, they may feel uncomfortable if there is conversation around race, and if there is a feeling that they are being accused of racism or they're being accused of not understanding, right? That's a loose definition of white fragility. And the reason why that comes up a lot, and the reason why that is problematic, particularly when we see in the workplace, is because Black and Brown employees, Black employees in particular, are at a place right now in the world where we need to openly be able to express some of the inequities and the disparities that happen in the workplace because of the color of our skin. And the reason why this is important is because when we think about the spectrum of difference, there are so many ways that we show up different, right? So many ways, the way that we communicate, the way that we speak, all those ways, right? Our sexual orientation, all of that. But many of those ways that we are different can be internal. Can be internal. Race, because of the way that we set this, construct of race up, is external. So it's the visible difference. So because of that, when we talk about race, and just because talking about race in this country, we've done such a terrible job of it, right? Obviously, this idea that white fragility can come into play. And I think one of the things that happens along with that as a partner is something that I'm going to call unhealthy frustration and anger on the part of employees of color. And what I mean by that, and the reason why I preface that by saying unhealthy, is because persons of color and employees of color, quite honestly, have been put upon so often, so regularly, and with so much brutality in the world and in the workplace, that there is, if I can be so honest, a space for that anger and that frustration and just sort of that emotional fatigue. In fact, there's a great book that I love that's been written by a woman by the name of Dr. Mary Frances Winters. This book was published in September of 2020, and it's called Black Fatigue, right? And she talks about how the consequences, the long-held consequences of racism has had a detrimental effect on the mind, the body, and the spirit of the Black person in America. And we see that quite often in the workplace. So these two concepts, right? So white fragility and unhealthy anger and frustration, because like I said again, I do believe that there's a space for that frustration. There's a space for that emotion. But when that emotion and there is unhealthy place, what happens is we get a breakdown of listening, right? Or we get a defensiveness on the part sometimes of persons of color, where our white colleagues feel like, well, I'm not going to ask anything. I'm not a word. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. So then this moment that practitioners like myself are trying to create, this moment of understanding, doesn't get anywhere, right? Because unhealthy level of anger and frustration, right? And when I say healthy, I mean, where we are able to, where we feel a sense of belonging and psychological safety, so we can talk about emotional people. We could talk about this emotional sort of anger, right? We need to be able to have that. And that our white colleagues are aware of and cognizant of this sense of white fragility, and they can put that down. Right? It's almost like everybody drop your guns, right?
Yeah. Disarm.
Disarm. Don't drop your feelings. I would never say that. That is not what everybody's entitled to, the way that they feel, to the things that they don't understand. But we've got to figure out this healthy way to discourse. There needs to be a healthy way to discourse where everybody has a listening post where they're able to say all their words, and there is a moment often created by people, like me, where we can create some understanding, right? I feel like that is, to just articulate just what happens or some of the things that happen in the workplace. I think that there's some other things like, there are white saviorism, and there's some other, behavioral constructs that come up, but this idea of, anger and frustration that comes from fatigue, and then the fragility that sometimes happens that disallows a healthy discourse. So I hope that's helpful.
Do you have a mic you can drop? Can you drop that one that's connected? Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And it's so fascinating, right? Like there's so much parallel in, like we were saying, like the humanity of this work. I know when it comes to leadership development, period, that exists, right? We talk about the empathetic leader. We talk about active listening. We talk about being able to give feedback, connect with others. And I feel like this is it's just a parallel path here. I think all those things are so necessary. So
100%,
yeah. So I want to shift gears now, Gigi. In the time that we have left, I have kind of like two other things that we can talk through. A moment ago, I had mentioned the women of color, as you know very well. Last year, I kicked off this Women of Color leadership coaching program, and and I'm so excited about it. And here's the interesting piece was, I've been working with women of color, people of all demographics, for my whole career. So during the pandemic, in particular, like especially the height of it, just about a year ago, I would say March through May, maybe even June, I had a number of people reach out to me independent of their organizations. And I was noticing they all happen to be women. They all happen to identify as people of color. They all are bringing up the same issues around imposter syndrome, not being recognized at a table, like really having other individuals who are non-POCs kind of supersede them on the promotion track. So those things that you kind of mentioned a moment ago. And one of the things, and I remember talking with you about this, is so much movement has been done in light of the George Floyd incident and also the Black Lives Matter, the movement to support diversity, equity, inclusion, and sometimes belonging. But what these women were sharing with me was, okay, that's great. You all have that diversity and inclusion stuff for these organizations to help them become more inclusive. What about us as women of color? Because we're often the demographic that is kind of left in the lurch. So I want to just kind of get, because I know we've talked about this, we're both so passionate about it. What's your take on, or I would say, what advice would you give to supporting women of color leaders, and you can lead from any seat, you know, in the workplace, and really kind of showing up in a way that they can continue to feel heard and also just aligned with their own values as well?
Well, whew, you're speaking my language now, right? You're speaking my language. Like you, I have, as part of my portfolio of work, I have 4 women right now. I have 4 people right now that I'm coaching. It just so happens that all 4 identify as cisgender women, right? All 4 are people of color. And the comments are the same. The comments are 100% exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
Now, I 100% believe that a lot of this work is tied together, right? It is tied together in terms of respecting women, valuing women, being able to create space for women, right? I think that the organization itself has onus, has accountability to do that, but and I say this all the time, and this comes up in my own coaching as I'm coached and as I coach these executive women in my life, that there is a responsibility that I have to make sure that an organization understands, that I understand where my voice is, right? Yeah. Oftentimes we're not given that. Shirley Chisholm's this great quote where she says, "Oh, I'm not going to have a seat at the table. Well, I'm going to bring my own folding chair." Now, at first glance or at first hearing, that sounds real aggressive, right? You know, what people would call aggressive, right? Because there's all of that. But 100%, I do believe that there is a level of assertiveness and assertion that women of color are, unfortunately, this should not be the case, right? This should not be the case, but it is. But it just is. There's a level of assertion that women of color have to take on, which is often, misconstrued as angry Black woman or whatever that looks like. But I think it has a lot to do with knowing our worth. Yes. Right. Knowing our worth. And in that, I have an acronym that I came up with. I'm the, people who know me, I'm the queen of acronyms. Queen of
Go for it. I want to hear it.
Like to the dismay of my team. They're like, oh my gosh, get the alphabet away from her. But there's an acronym that I like to use as a woman of color in business, right? I'm here to set up camp. Camp, right? Camp is the acronym that I am confident about my purpose. I am confident about my purpose, and I'm setting up camp here, and I am focused on my purpose, not to the detriment of anyone else, right? Not confident to where I want to be, overbearing or overrun people. I'm not trying to do that. What I am trying to do is I want to start with the end in mind, right? My end is that I know what my purpose is. And the reason I know my purpose is because I understand what my talent set is. I know what I'm good at. Yeah. Right. And Raabia, you know me, right? There's tons of things I'm not good at.
Oh, I know.
Tons of things I'm not good at. But the things I'm good at, I'm here, sir, ma'am. I'm here, right? Because I'm going to put those talents into practice. And oftentimes we have to figure out ways to find our voice in that. I know for me and for a number of the women that I work with, as it relates to executive coaching and having programs like the program you have, right, is a great way to find places to have my voice heard, right? If I'm confident about my purpose, which I am, I
Yeah.
need my voice to be heard so that other people can understand that I'm confident about my purpose, and so that my purpose can help your organization and all of that. But if I don't have a voice here because of bigotry, because of, a lack of inclusion, because of just like toxic people, right? Some people are not bigots, they're not racist, they're just toxic, or toxicity in general. I've got to figure out a path, right, where I won't be silenced. I won't. Right? I'm not going to overrun anybody. It's not my intention to be unkind or aggressive to the part where I'm overbearing, but I'm confident about my purpose, sir and madam. And guess what? I'm going to live my purpose here, or I'm going to find a new path.
Yeah. I think that's really just so powerful. So you're getting a lot of love, Gigi, a lot of hearts on the comments, especially about setting up camp. I mean, that's an acronym that we can all remember. And I know that's why you love your alphabet. So that makes me happy.
That's exactly right. It's like adult pedagogy. People remember acronyms. My team is like, stop it with the acronyms. Stop
it, Gigi. Well, I think that's incredible. So thank you for that. And just a note to anyone who is listening, like I would say there are folks like Gigi and myself. I got a note that you may have frozen, but I hear you okay. So
yeah, I'm fine. I see you fine.
Okay. Got it. I think that's probably okay. I see you, right?
I see you fine. Yeah.
Perfect. I think there's a little bit of a delay, so it might have been when that time that happened earlier. So we're in good shape. I was just going to say, for the leaders and individuals, just anyone who is listening out there, there are programs and there are folks like Gigi and myself who really do support you, especially, I would say, for women of color. We have a special place in our hearts because we identify as such too. So we know what's up. And so you have allies in us. So I just wanted to reinforce that. We're happy to support you along the way.
100%. And Raabia, if I don't have the bandwidth and if I can't take on a client, I am happy to send them your way. Them your way. I believe in the work that you're doing. And I'm not just saying that because you're my good girlfriend and you have me on here, but like I am saying it because you're my good girlfriend, right? And you have me on here. I support you, and the work that you're doing for women in business, for women who are executives, is important. And, we need that support.
Yes. We were saying black and brown, we're going to take over the world. That's the Jack and Brown, baby. Thank you, Gigi. That means a lot to me. And as you know very well, I feel the same way about you. So, I would love to end with some questions for you around your book, The Loud Brown Round Girl. I'm in love with it. And I was so honored to be there at your book launch for it. And I would love to hear. Absolutely. I mean, it's so powerful. And can you share with us about how this process has been for you, what the experience has been like for you to actually share and showcase some very, very personal moments and of vulnerability and just really, I would say, difficult situations, and also some very beautiful moments. What's that been like for you?
Yeah, it's been a head trip, girl. I'm not going to even lie. It's been crazy, but, in many, many good ways. So I'll start from the beginning. Everything in my life is about creating space for inclusion and belonging, everything. And so when I wrote this book, when I started writing this book, I had that in mind. Right? I had that in mind. But when people got the book, and if you are to get the book, you'll see that there are lots of stories in the book that may at first blush have nothing to do with DEI&B. Right? So I tell stories in the book about, my first 5th grade love, right? My first kiss. I also, I tell stories about body image and just sort of the first time that I felt, that my body and the way that people perceived me was through this lens of sizeism. So I tell stories like that. I tell stories about, what it means to be perceived in the world as a Black woman in terms of my intellect and all of that. But the reason for that and the reason for the storytelling is because what I'm really trying to do is, again, this process, starting with the end in mind. When I think about racism and when I think about bias and bigotry, I've often thought, and and I'm a student of Daniel Kahneman and all of the researchers who talk about unconscious bias and bias on our brains. I think about what is at the basis of bias, right? What gets us to our biases? Oftentimes, according to the research, it's assumptions. We assume things about people, right? And these assumptions, if they're widely held throughout our lives and they're never addressed, they can lead us to having a bias, which can lead us to a stereotype, which can lead us to a prejudice, which can ultimately lead us to a racist act. But what if this is me, Gigi, talking, I could use storytelling to help bust up people's assumptions about me, right? People have assumed things because I'm loud, and I don't mean loud in volume, I mean like big personality, right? If people have assumed things about me, if people have assumed things about me, maybe I can use a story, a real story, something that's happened in my life, a nonfiction moment, to help you understand who I really am. Maybe if you don't understand what racism feels like, I can tell you the story about the first time I realized that my skin was brown and I was the victim of racism, right? A real story. I humanize myself. That helps to bust up the assumption. Same thing about being, round, right? That's the moniker I like to use, right? I'm a round woman, right? The first time that body image became a thing for me, if I can tell you a story that can help you understand how I felt, what happens is, and my hope is that it humanizes me.
Yeah.
Right? It helps somebody who might be suffering from a bias against somebody that looks like me or is loud like me. Think twice and think, wait a minute, Gigi told me this story about her life. I didn't know where we were going with this in this book, but I get it.
I get it. Yeah.
What she's doing is using storytelling to humanize, to fight the assumption, to actually dismantle the assumption. And that's what the Loud Brown Brown Girl is. That's actually my training style, right? I use storytelling. I am committed to storytelling. I think storytelling, and as we know, as we help executive leaders all the time, being a great storyteller is so important really contextualize things, to give examples. But that's what the book is about. It is about the assumptions that lead to bias. So in that way, it's about my DEI&B work. But, I can't ask people to be vulnerable and open and vulnerable and all that. I think I said vulnerable already. If I'm not vulnerable, right? If I'm not vulnerable. So I put it all out there. There's more to come because my sophomore book is going to be dropping in the fall. So there's more to say. But that's my MO, right? To use stories. To use stories, to use vulnerability, to humanize myself, to humanize people who look like me, so that we can dismantle the assumptions that form biases.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love it. And I think the humanization, that's where it's at. And I know I've studied history for undergrad and grad school. And I remember writing a paper just as an example on the conflict in Kashmir between India and Pakistan, which is age old, has been going on forever. And I remember reading this one that really struck me because it was an interview of the two soldiers right at the border. And like during the day, they're required to kind of stand guard and stare into each other's eyes with their weaponry. And they said, as soon as we're off the clock, we just kind of hang out and play cards.
Right.
And it's so, because you humanize the other, and we're all kind of similar, right?
Yes.
So, but I thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
and
you're very welcome. Very welcome.
Yeah. So Gigi, hold on. I should have had it with me. Give me one second. I'm going to grab your book because there's something I would love to end with if you're okay with it. It's just a line.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with it. Yes, sure.
You're very professional, everybody.
You're fine. Hi, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Those who are on, I'm just going to play host for a second. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I was just playing host to our guests.
I love it. It makes me happy. I want to co-pilot everything with you moving forward.
Yes, let's do everything together.
I love it. So Gigi, I want to just tell you, this makes 2021, I know, a good year. I'm so happy. I am so happy that you were able to join us. Thank you for your honesty, for your transparency, your openness, and just the consistency of that. You mean so much to me. And I cannot believe that we met less than a year ago, and I feel so
Less than a year
connected.
ago.
Like
Same,
yeah,
girl. Same.
same.
Seriously, seriously, same. No, and I would say thank you to you. Thank you for this space, for holding space for me and for the 3 other guests that have preceded me. Thank you for holding space for the guests who will come after me. Raabia, this work that you're doing is so important. It is so important. Don't stop. Don't stop, right? Rest when you need to, right? Like, you know, get all the things you need to, but don't stop. The world needs you, right? I need you. You're amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, Gigi. That makes me so, I'm really, really honored by that, and I treasure it. So thank you. So if you're okay with it, I would like to read this little blurb from, ladies and gentlemen, you really got to check this book out. I mean, it's just delightful. And Gigi, where can folks get it if they're interested?
They can get it on Amazon. You can go to Amazon. You type in Gigi Gilliard. You can type in The Loud Brown Round Girl. It's available there in ebook and in the paperback.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so Gigi says in one of her chapters, you might see that, let me start from here. The next time you meet a loud person, check to see if that someone is content to be a thermometer, blending into whatever previously existed in the room, or that someone is determined to come into the room and be the thermostat, adjusting the tone of the room warmer or colder. The next time you meet a person like this, look again. Challenge your critical eye that tells you this person is too dramatic or too much or overbearing even. You might see that what they are just trying to do is use the best of themselves to connect. Because, biscuits, trust me, at the end of it, if we aren't focused on connecting with others in a way that brings learning and growth and development and warmth and goodness and love, then we should not be loud. We should actually then keep our mouths shut and be very, very quiet.
Thank you, Raabia. Thank you.
Gigi,
Maybe you should do the audiobook.
I got you. I just want that cool headset like you, and then I'm golden. It'll be good.
Love that. Love it. Thank you.
Gigi, sending you so much love. Here's my virtual hug. One day we're going to meet in person.
Yes, right? Hello. Hi.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Raabia. Thank you to all the guests. Thank you for everybody that's been on, all of the beautiful, beautiful people that have been here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And yes, and thank you to everyone for joining. This was Legit Leadership Live. I would love your feedback and comments. Gigi and I are going to go back and look at this video and see all the fun stuff that you've added. Thank you for being here and participating. So have a great rest of your day, and stay tuned for episode 5 coming next month. So more on that soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.